Hey everybody, TacticAngel here, back on the PlayStation 4, playing some World of Warships Legends, and today we're here to talk about Jerzy Swirski, in a new installment of The Man, The Math, The Legend. Like my ship reviews, I'll start with history, we'll move into some analysis, talk about his abilities, and then discuss Jerzy as an inspiration for other commanders. As usual, I should have left an index down in the description if you do want to jump around, but otherwise, let's just jump right into it. When Jerzy Swirski was born, it was March 24th, 1882, in Kalisz. The town today lies in Poland, but in 1882, it was part of the Russian Empire, just like the vast majority of modern-day Poland. In the Gregorian calendar, we would consider this April 5th. Swirski would attend the Marine Cadet Corps at St. Petersburg in 1899 and enter Russian naval service as a midshipman in 1902. Initially, he served in the Baltic Fleet, but in 1905 he would find his way to the Black Sea, where he would stay for the remainder of his service to Russia, working his way up to Marine Captain over the next decade, when he was placed in charge of a destroyer brigade there. For most of World War I, he was actually the Chief Navigation Officer for the Black Seas Fleet. This was more of a staff position, but in practice the Black Seas Fleet was tasked with keeping the Ottoman fleet at bay and hoping to limit its damage by shore bombardment, as well as performing some strikes of their own, and then basically trying to limit the damage SMS Goeben would do before she wore herself out. In May 1918, after the Germans seized Sevastopol, the Russian Black Seas Fleet, with the exception of ships that wanted to support the coup against the Russian government, fell under the control of the newly formed Navy of the Ukrainian state, formed as a protectorate under the German Empire, Swirski included. During his 5 months of service for the Ukraine, he held the rank of Rear Admiral. But Swirski would soon return to Poland, which following World War II became an independent, unified state for the first time in more than a century, depending on how you want to measure it, really. He had been summoned by General Józef Haller, commander of the Polish army. At that point, the new Department of Maritime Affairs actually was a department within the Polish army. He was actually nominated by another legend, Józef Piłsudski, to be the deputy head of Department of Maritime Affairs. This is kind of a big deal because Piłsudski may be the single most important figure in the refounding of Poland. He also had a killer stash, and while I am not a medical professional, I can almost assure you that he had high blood pressure. For a time, Swirski was given temporary command over the Polish Navy when it looked as though the Soviets, not content with the amount of violence that they could perpetrate among people that were ostensibly their own countrymen, appeared to set their eyes on Poland in late 1920. It was probably no surprise then that Swirski would work to expand and modernize the fledgling Polish Navy when he became its fleet commander and assumed the rank of Vice Admiral in January 1922, basically being the second highest ranking member of the Polish Navy at the time. Even towards the end of the 1930s, most Russians still remembered a day when Poland was just the westernmost part of their country. And over the decade and a half where Swirski worked to make the Polish Navy ready for war, he envisioned a future conflict being against Russia. As 1939 rolled around, though, Germany's territorial ambition seemed to be a far greater threat to Poland, and the diplomatic tensions between those two countries worsened significantly. So on the 24th of August 1939, a delegation of British government officials arrived in Poland to try to convince Polish leadership to preserve at least the most modern portions of its navy by sailing them to English waters. This would come to be known as the Peking Plan, or Operation Peking, after the fact, kind of, since the signal used to launch the evacuation was Peking, Peking, Peking. As such, the Gram, the Błyskawica, and Berza sailed for England on August 29th. 2 days later, Germany invaded. Originally, the hope for the Polish army was to fight a retreat to the Romanian border, where they could be reinforced and resupplied, and then push back against the invasion. These 3 destroyers were hoped to serve as escorts for those convoys. This turned out to be wishful thinking, though, as Russia was in cahoots with the invading Germans and took the eastern half of the country for their own. Swirski was in Poland for 5 days following the invasion before he left with other members of the Polish Ministry of Military Affairs on September 5th. They crossed through into Romania and then made their way to England. At that point, Poland's participation in the war wasn't exactly clear. Great Britain had declared war on Germany on September 3rd, as they had promised to do if Polish territory was violated, but with two much larger forces descending upon them, Poland had to surrender, and did so on September 27th. Swirski was instrumental in helping to negotiate the Polish-British naval agreement, and was one of its signers in November 1939. Though undoubtedly a figure that we look back with some reverence upon today, Swirski actually wasn't all that well liked in his time. Many of his subordinates considered leaving Poland as cowardly. He was also involved in a bit of finger-pointing when two submarines headed for England wandered into Swedish waters where they would be interned for the remainder of the war. When greeting Polish officers, many of them refused to even shake his hand. Commander-in-Chief of the Polish forces, General Jerzy Swirski, even moved to dismiss Swirski and replace him as head of the Navy. The British intervened on his behalf, though, ensuring that Swirski would stay on through the remainder of the war, no doubt helped by his prior involvement in negotiations for the Peking Plan, the aforementioned naval agreement, and because Swirski is said to have spoken perfect English, in addition to Polish, Russian, French, and even a little bit of German and Italian. Swirski would remain the head of the Polish forces in the West, fighting alongside the Allies until 1947. During that time, he helped the Polish Navy obtain new ships from the Royal Navy and saw to the training of their crews, ensuring that the banner of Poland flew over their small but proud fleet for the remainder of the war. Following World War II, though, he remained in exile and would live in England for the next 12 years until his death in London on June 12, 1959. For his service, Vice Admiral Swirski earned admission into the Order of St. Vladimir and Order of St. Anna in Imperial Russia, the Grand Cross of the Order of Polinia Restituta, and the Order of St. Stanislaus for his service to Poland, admission as an honorary Knight of the Order of Bath from England, as well as the Ordre de Mérite and Legion of Honor from France, Order of the Sword from Sweden, and Order of the Cross of Liberty from Finland. Indeed, once the full breadth of Swirski's service is looked at, his image in the eyes of his countrymen and around the world has largely recovered, with memorials to his honor placed in Poland and elsewhere. It is to him that the Polish Navy owes perhaps more than any one man. As he worked to ensure Poland the most modern navy he could, he ensured that some part of it could be preserved, and helped to lead those free Polish forces against the odds. There is also something to be said for a man with the character to do all of these things, even if those actions are not appreciated during his lifetime. And it is for those reasons, on top of being noted as a wise tactician and great leader of men, that Jerzy Swirski is included as a naval legend. As far as Jerzy Swirski in-game, if you want to play the Błyskawica, he is presently your one and only choice. So make of that what you will, he's not a bad commander for that particular boat. More importantly though, Jerzy is one of the most useful commanders when it comes to his base trait, for use as an inspiration for both destroyers and cruisers. If you really want to win the spotting battle as a destroyer, he is, for better or worse, almost required. For cruisers, he gives you the ability to play what I would call an inside cruiser, allowing you to win the spotting game by enough that you can basically ignore people who are spamming HE from 12 kilometers or greater, as if that's their only job, engaging more often on your terms than on someone else's terms, and capturing bases, which rumor has it has something to do with winning the game. He also enables some ships to enjoy stealth radar, or at least near stealth radar, which is an exceptionally neat trick to have. Looking at the abilities you'll have when using Jerzy, I will start at the top and work my way down, but the first thing I'll do is make some visual recommendations here. First ability we'll come across is Contact is Imminent. I would generally suggest skipping this because unless there are other ships in the future that Jerzy can command, the Błyskawica is not a very strong torpedo boat. Adding 4 knots will help you hit a bit more often by reducing the travel time by up to 7%, but it comes at the expense of observant rage, which helps your main battery reload all that much faster. The Błyskawica doesn't have an incredible rate of fire, so this actually is a pretty nice ability for him to have, and it can make you much more dangerous at both setting fires and winning more gunfights quicker. Though this does come with an increased detectability of incoming torpedoes, that isn't really an incredibly useful element of this ability, though I will give you, on average, that it will give you around 1 extra second to dodge. The real problem with Observant Rage is that it takes your already poor rudder shift and makes it 10% worse. If you can't live with that, that's really the strongest argument I can see for taking Contact is Imminent. In slot 2, you have the choice between Look at Me Now and Mortar. The safer of these two options is definitely to lean into your stealth, since you already have a fairly noticeable destroyer, and Swirski's base trait is going to help you a little more with that. I don't personally think Mortar is all that competitive, because the type of ship that really excels at this has a bit of a higher range and fire chance than is available on Błyskawica. That said, the argument for this is that the Błyskawica can already land single salvos for more than 3,000 damage against other destroyers. 10% more than that is going to do a lot more to make you even better at getting a quick 1-2 knockout. Naturally, if this does appeal to you, then I'd suspect you want to pair this with Observant Rage, which we've already talked about, and potentially Reaching Out, which we're about to. But not before we touch on Back in Stock. This being another torpedo ability. It is probably not the greatest choice for Błyskawica, and dare I say, it is easily the weakest choice among these 3 options for a ship that is average or above average in gun performance. Since you're very likely to want to play any reasonably gunny destroyer as a destroyer hunter, Twist and Track is probably the most useful right out of the box. It's going to help your not-so-fast turrets turn quite a bit better, but it's also going to give you a 6th sense ability for where the closest ship is, which is very useful in hunting down other DDs. Informing your team of their approximate location, if you choose to share that with them, and occasionally avoiding them if you really aren't in a position to fight. I estimate that Reaching Out is probably the second most useful skill in this slot, but I think that's only really going to be good if you're really into open water harassment. The extra range is occasionally nice, but you only have average range on Błyskawica, so you're not likely to be more annoying than a similarly motivated Russian ship, or even a French one for that matter. In slot 4, neither of the abilities that are listed here are extraordinary, but I can say personally, I prefer Smoke on the Water. Getting an extra shot or 2 off from smoke is sometimes the difference between no fires and 1 fire that sticks for the next couple of minutes. On the other hand, if you want to further max out your already good speed in the Błyskawica and focus more on position and map control, then you might enjoy Cloudy Days. This will limit the deployment time, which can mean that you easily sail out of smoke that you're trying to set, or that you won't cover the same area that you normally would, but it will definitely mean your smoke lasts a relatively short period of time, very similar to a German smoke. Now I will mention that in spite of not having a really strong preference for one of these or the other, I have circled Smoke on the Water because I consider the penalties on Cloudy Days to be pretty brutal at lower levels. In your legendary slot, there are 2 reasons you should choose Unstoppable. The first is this is the only ability you have access to that can keep your engine and rudder partially operable if they're damaged. And for a destroyer, both of these modules are very vulnerable, and to lose either one is just a declaration of your imminent death. So you do want what this can give to you. The second is that Leviathan just isn't a really good skill. And for me, it takes the lightning out of the Błyskawica due to your decrease in speed. But if you want to present the strongest argument for why you should use Leviathan as an ability, it isn't really the hit points. It is more the special ability, which is going to trim probably something close to a whole second off of your rudder shift in most situations where you need maneuverability the most. That said, I still think what is probably going to happen is you're going to swing your rudder around a lot faster, it's probably going to get disabled, then you're probably going to fix it, it will get disabled again with the next shot, and then you'll die. At least a lot of the time, anyway. And when that happens, I do want you to think of me fondly. For inspirations, it's pretty easy for me to make suggestions for Swirski currently, because he can only possibly captain one ship. Since you already are helping to reduce your sea detectability, you've probably taken Look at Me Now, then I imagine the go-to choice for almost all DD commanders is going to be Eric Bay. His ability will further improve your sea detectability, and help the Błyskawica actually get some pretty respectable sea detectability numbers. Obviously, since you can see I've chosen Bill Sims, I'm going to say for survivability, there's a real good chance you should choose him. Though not a great battleship inspiration, Sims' hit point boost is based on a set number times your tier, and in this case you're adding 6 times whatever that chosen number is there. Since this nets me around 1800 hit points, and I tend to sail into knife fights with other destroyers, this can mean the difference between winning an engagement or losing it, or having a healthy chunk of hit points afterwards to look for yet another fight. If, for some reason, you have a really highly leveled Trubetskoy, his generalized reduction in damage taken more or less accomplishes the same thing. It's just a question of whether or not you want to take off the damage as it's coming in, or whether you want to have more hit points in order to actually survive the damage. But the next best choice is probably going to be Violet, because his ability allows you to more quickly disengage. This is probably, at least based on my experience, going to help most when you have to engage another ship while there are several enemies targeting you. If you're able to defeat that ship, or put a smoke screen to block at least his vision, and maybe the other ships are outside of your sea detectability, then maybe you can get away. You could probably call those lightning strikes. I have a hard time really quantifying how useful this is though, because you never quite know the amount of damage you don't take from shots that are never taken because the enemy can't see you anymore. For open water harassment, if that's your thing, this does offer a little more possibility, because dropping the time that it takes to go dark by 4 or 5 seconds may be exactly the amount of time that it takes for a battleship to get its guns all the way around to realize he has nothing to shoot at, except maybe his best guess. And if he does take that guess, then you have enough time to maybe get a volley or 2 out before he reloads, and you've gone dark again. Situational, yes, but it is a situation that you can kind of engineer with a certain playstyle. If you instead wanted to boost your offensive ability, then I would most likely suggest using either Burke or Abueno. In both cases, these guys are going to help improve the performance of your guns. Burke is going to help you land a lot more shots, and obviously the more shots you land, the more damage you're likely to do. Pretty straightforward. Abueno isn't a bad choice, though I would choose Burke before him, because you'd probably be shooting mostly HE in Błyskawica, and turning one of those 3000 damage salvos into 3100 damage may be all the difference that you actually need to finish off an unlucky enemy destroyer. When looking at Swirski as an inspiration, he is definitely usable for all ship types. In fact, for a long time I would use him in place of Makawa or Bay, just because it was easier to rank up one commander and get a smaller bonus that was easier to rank up than 2 or 3 for a slightly better version of the stealth bump that they can give you. Now that said, I will point out the type of ships that benefit from Swirski the most, and indeed even the kind of captains that you should consider using on those ships to help get the most out of your Swirski inspiration. For destroyers, Swirski is a very powerful inspiration, because so much of your job is not just shooting other stuff. This means the lower your base sea detectability is, or the more that you want to play your ship as a torpedo boat instead of a gunboat, the more benefit that there is to having this Polish inspiration. He still works pretty well on American destroyers though, if you're specifically out there hunting other DDs that you expect to have really low concealment. But I'd say he's a little less useful for Russian ships. And anyone else who's looking forward to raining down fire on battleships at medium or longer ranges with a quiet satisfaction that you're basically an HE spamming cruiser that simply doesn't have a citadel. In an actual cruiser, though, Swirski is also a really strong choice for those inside cruiser players. This usually means pairing him with Mikawa and taking slot 3 concealment module. Swirski is a particularly exceptional commander when paired with a high-level George Dewey, inspired also with Mikawa. On ships with radar, this means that you can often use your own detection as an advantage that will tell you if a destroyer is inside of your radar range. I think all of the American Tier 7s with maxed out commanders will have a sea detectability very close to, if not slightly below, their radar range. The one standout exception to this is the Indianapolis, that can actually get a sea detectability that is considerably less than its long-range radar. Though most of the other nations do not have radar as readily available on their cruisers, both British and Italians have really favorable sea detectability ranges on their cruisers, so a similar build can give you some unique advantages. This is a viable use of a base commander though on just about any nation's ships, and it will probably be a build that is reasonably popular on the competitive scene if and when that actually develops in Legends. Probably wouldn't bother as much with Russians though, since they rely so much on range, but that just may be my personal preference. With battleships, at least right now, running a stealth build is not very meta, and considering the relatively uniform sea detectability of all high-tier battleships in Legends, even more uniform than you can find on PC, I would not highly encourage the use of Swirski unless you want to be the one person who tries to usher in an age of aggressive and stealthy battleships. I kind of think it won't happen, but it is at least theoretically possible. In any case, those have been my thoughts on Jerzy Swirski. Thank you, everybody, for joining me on this episode of The Man, the Math, the Legend. I hope you have enjoyed your time here, and I hope to see you on the next one.